All right, we've had a couple false starts here. I am going to wait to make sure we are actually live before saying anything. And it appears we are actually live. Um,
We're doing it. It's happening.
it's happening. James Harden was just traded
This
to
time.
the Brooklyn Nets. But there were more teams involved than that. There were more players involved.
This time.
Um, this is a kind of overwhelming trade to piece together.
Yes.
Um, there was
Let
one
me tell you about.
player involved, I think, that no one was expecting to get involved. So why don't you give us some bearings on this, break down the trade?
Well, Dave, that's right. Steve Francis was involved in the James Harden. No. So we actually spent what, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes before the show piecing together who was going where. 15 is a little generous. It was closer to 10. But all you need to know about how complex this wound up being is that I had to break out a legal pad for it. Um, so it wound up being four teams. The Nets obviously get James Harden. We all saw what happened with the Rockets last night with Harden, Boogie Cousins, John Wall, all having their own things to say. A lot of shots going in various directions. Harden's now a net. The Rockets, who traded Harden, wind up with Dante Exum, Rodions Kurucs, four first-round draft picks, one of which was Milwaukee's, then went to Cleveland, has now gone down to Houston. And the surprise player of the trade, as Dave mentioned, Victor Oladipo, moving to Houston. Now,
I was actually talking about Dante Exum.
oh, of course, the favorite son of the Tom and Dave show. But yeah, so Oladipo wound up in Houston. The way that it worked was the Nets sent Karis LeVert to Houston, who then got traded to Indiana so that Victor Oladipo could come down to Houston. And the final piece was the Cleveland Cavaliers, who traded Dante Exum and a first round pick that was originally Milwaukee's, wind up with Jarrett Allen and Torian Prince. So that's the full trade. Dave, which part of this would you like to address first?
Okay. Yeah. So there's a lot here.
Yeah,
Let's. Do you want to start small and build?
yeah, I think we can crescendo this.
Okay. So I want to start with. I don't understand how the Cleveland Cavaliers came out of this with Jarrett Allen, Torian Prince. It
The
seems
Cavs made
like
out like gangbusters.
it was almost like a favor. Like
Yeah,
here's another pick, um, and we'll take on Allen. Maybe their thought process with that was we have Christian Wood, we have DeMarcus Cousins. Do we really need another center? But
yeah,
Allen needs to go because of money reasons in Brooklyn,
yeah.
so we need to find a third team for him. That makes sense. But the fact that the third team, all they had to give up was Exum and a pick, um, surprised about that. The Cavs have, I mean, they have a lot of centers at this point, but they've kind of created a like everyone. We've been remarking. We had Justin Rowan on. We've been remarking about how the Cavs are a little bit better than everyone expected, and
Yeah,
now they actually have like a very solid young core with three,
yeah,
four, maybe five high upside players.
yeah. So yeah, I think the Cavs Jared Allen thing was like we talked about Victor Oladipo being a surprise in this trade. Jared Allen to the Cavs specifically was a surprise. I think my first reaction with Jared Allen going to the Cavs in this was, oh, okay, so this wouldn't happen if Spencer Dinwiddie was healthy.
Mm,
Because if Dinwiddie's healthy, he probably just goes to the Rockets, and that's
yeah,
that.
yeah, that's a
Um,
great point.
but obviously, Jared Allen was the next contract up. He was the big man who wasn't friends with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving before they came to Brooklyn. But it's what you said. Like they have a pretty good young core now. Obviously, we don't know what the fit's going to be with Andre Drummond and Jared Allen on the team at the same time. But
And
like,
JaVale McGee.
well, I mean, JaVale's a three-point marksman. I mean, you can put him in the corner and just kind of leave him there for a possession. He'll sink whatever shot comes to him. We've all seen the empty gym workouts, but yeah. So I don't know. If nothing else, the Cavs get a really exciting high upside player for ultimately not that much.
Yeah. Um, to move on from the Cavs as we build this up, I think the
Yes.
next part about this is the Pacers very sneakily ending up getting in here. we've heard a lot of rumors about Victor Oladipo wanting to be traded. That
Yep.
he had, ties to so many different teams around the league that were looking to try to get him,
Including
and
your Miami Heat.
including the Miami Heat. That's another part of this that I'm not going to get into. That these are the two players here are players that were linked to the Heat for a while, and we ended up with zero of them. Not going to worry about that right now.
Y'all are looking very Celticsy these days.
But we so the Pacers kind of come out of this looking like, oh, here's an opportunity to actually get Oladipo on this expiring contract, get him out of here,
Yeah.
turn him into an asset. And they turned him
Yeah.
into Karis LeVert, who is honestly probably a really good fit with that Pacers team that has been killing it to start the year.
I think the way I'm looking at the Pacers in this trade was they kind of walked in with house money because obviously we've heard all the talk of Oladipo wanting a trade. We've heard Oladipo's name brought up in every free agency discussion, like as that sort of 1B to Giannis. Well, as that number 2 to Giannis's number 1. And then obviously Giannis signed. And then it was like, well, Victor Oladipo's still going to be around. Now, at least for the time being, he's a Rocket.
I mean, he still is around this free agency.
Assuming they don't re-sign him.
Yes.
Which they don't have his bird rights, so I don't know what their salary cap situation is going to be. But it looks like they didn't take on a ton of salary. Obviously, they have John Wall, who is a walking ton of salary.
Yes.
But other than that, I don't know. They might be able to afford to re-sign him.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't see how I mean, I get Oladipo wanting to move on to a different team and everything. That's his right and everything.
Yeah, of course.
But I mean, the Pacers are looking good. So I do wonder, like, from his perspective, like, is there any part of him that thinks he wanted out a little bit too early? Because it kind of seems like they were figuring some things out.
Yeah. We talked about this before we got on the show. Just like, okay, we get wanting out, but like, did you wind up in that much better of a situation than you were in Indiana? Because like, the Pacers, for as good as they look right now, I think we both look at them and say, all right, yeah, maybe they win a first round playoff series. But if they run into Brooklyn or Milwaukee, they're probably getting bounced. And now you wind up in Houston, and it's like, do they even win a first round playoff series? Like, if you look at what the top 4 in the West are going to be, what'll it be? Like, Lakers, Nuggets, Clippers, and I don't know, who's hot right now?
I can't even remember.
It's a good moment for the show.
Spurs are playing pretty well. I think the Spurs are up there right now.
Like but like if you're a bottom half of the top 8,
team, you don't want to be in that situation where I think being in that bottom half of the West. Although, as we've said, good chance that the bottom half of the West is sort of like separated by only like a half a game or a few games or something like that.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe the Rockets even wind up in a weird tiebreaker where they get the 4 seed.
Yeah,
probably not, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is. I think the Pacers come out of this looking like a similar or even better team, because the thing is about Oladipo. As good as Oladipo was, he wasn't the main guy in Indiana anymore.
No,
I think you could even say he wasn't the second guy. This year, both Sabonis and Brogdon have really outplayed Oladipo to the point where he was kind of this third guy. And do you want to be paying your third guy, what, $28 million, however much Oladipo is being paid right now? No.
Probably not.
So I think this is a great idea to bring in LeVert, who you're losing a lot of defense with LeVert, but I think the sort of instant offense that LeVert can provide will be very valuable to them. I'm curious if he is going to be in a 6-man role in Indiana the same way he was in Brooklyn this year. I think that role suits him very well.
Stop you right there. If you remember, Steve Nash said Karis LeVert is a starter.
Oh, you're right.
Whether he starts for the Nets or not is another matter.
That's a good point. LeVert is obviously very capable of being a starter. I think my questions with them is more like, I think the only part of the Indiana like success this year I've been skeptical about is just like scoring off the bench, and
LeVert can give you that.
Yeah, And
I
now,
also, just looking up Karis LeVert's contract, you basically kick the can down the road on, well, we're going to lose one of our top 3 or 4 rotation guys. Because, like, Oladipo, again, brought up in every free agent discussion under the sun for the summer after this season. LeVert is signed for this season, he's signed for next season, and the season after that, and
wow,
then he's a free agent. So
what's
not
the
only do you have him for a couple years, he'll be around long enough that you'll probably have his bird rights by that point.
what
So
how much is he making a year?
17 and a half. He's on a 3-year, 51 mil. Like,
It's a great deal.
this is a good deal for the Pacers, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know. We talked about paying Oladipo 28 mil. Obviously, you don't know if he's ever going to get back to where he was before the injury, and the injury was horrible and very unfortunate. But
You know,
I don't know.
it was unfortunate and horrible, and I think he's been slow to get back. And I did
Yeah.
just kind of start this whole thing by saying he's been outplayed by Brogdon and Sabonis. But that's only because those two have been amazing.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Like, it's
oh,
not like he stunk up the place.
yeah, Oladipo at the moment is averaging 20 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists on pretty decent efficiency.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think he'll be uh, he's still a very valuable player, and I think
Absolutely.
a bought-in Victor Oladipo um, with the Rockets will be great. I have seen a
Yeah.
lot on Twitter too about. I mean, I think a lot of people like to make the comparisons between different players who are in similar circumstances, and
Yeah.
you never know exactly what's going on with a team or a player. But I do think there is something to the fact that Oladipo has wanted out for a while now, and
Yeah.
he has still played really well, played really hard.
Remind you
Um,
of anybody? Well, not the playing hard part, but the playing well despite wanting out part.
um, who were we thinking?
I'm thinking James Harden.
Well, the thing about Harden though is that Harden's had like a rough last 3 or 4 games, and I don't want to
That's fair.
overreact about those last 3 or 4 games. But I do think he kind of came into the year, and yeah. Now let's move to the Rockets part of this.
Okay. Yeah.
He
This is a
definitely
good
came
segue.
into the year ready to prove people wrong that he was out of shape or you know not going to be as good anymore because of this drama or whatever, saying like, "Hey, I am still this good."
Yeah.
But I don't want to harp on some of his bad performances, but some of
Do
his
it.
last
Harp.
couple
Let's
games,
go. We're talking about
um,
basketball. We only do negativity here.
last game, what was this? Last night,
Yeah.
shot 5 for 16, only had 16 points. He shot 5 for 14 the other night, 5 for 17 the other night. He hasn't scored more than 21 points since December 31st.
Was
So,
this Harden's 7th game this year?
eighth, ninth.
Okay. Well,
So, I do think there's kind of and I really don't think anyone should take those numbers as any sort of indication of Harden's quality on a team anymore or
no,
something. I
absolutely not. Especially in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I do think it just was it seems like this accelerated very quickly from a fan's perspective because we saw this press
Hmm.
conference last night. We saw these comments from Boogie Cousins and John Wall. But, these things are always going on for longer than I think we think it is.
Yes.
So I wouldn't be surprised if over the last week there's been a lot more momentum to get this done. And then last night was kind of like a cutting of the cord moment.
Yeah, I feel like we hear like the term like ongoing talks or ongoing discussions to trade James Harden without really understanding like what that means.
Yeah.
So like from our perspective, it's like, all right, yeah, 2 weeks ago the discussions were ongoing. A week ago the discussions were ongoing. All of a sudden a trade happened. Like, no, these probably progressed gradually.
Yeah.
As far as the Rockets part of this, it feels
Can
like a necessary step towards a rebuild.
yeah,
Uh,
can you remind me everything the Rockets got out of this?
I can. So they got Victor Oladipo, Tom and Dave show favorite Dante Exum, Rodions Kurucs, 4 first-round draft picks, one of which is Milwaukee's, 3 of which are Brooklyn's, I believe, and then 4 pick swaps from Brooklyn, which I think puts them in terms of total like number of picks affected in that same area as like the Anthony Davis and Paul George
Yeah.
hauls of like, yeah, for the next 7 years, we're going to be moving back in the draft.
Yeah.
So that's the haul for the Rockets. I mean, the main piece is Oladipo and
Yeah.
the picks. Like Exum is a nice little piece, but like not exactly for as much love as we give him on this show. Not going to be an all-star or anything this year. Probably not going to start for that. Definitely not going to start for that team. Um,
I think he can be an all-star maybe in, the 4 to 6 year range.
Listen, you give Dante Exum the right circumstances.
Just give him the ball.
Yeah, see what happens.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, that's. I saw somebody make comparisons between John Wall and Victor Oladipo to John Wall and Bradley Beal. I don't know if I would necessarily draw the comparison between Beal and Oladipo, but
No.
you'll have a fun team. You'll have a
Yeah.
really good backcourt.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that the Wall Oladipo backcourt has over the Beal Wall one is both Wall and Oladipo. I know they're
Yeah,
both recovering, still kind of recovering from injuries. So it's
yeah.
hard to say, but they have incredibly high defensive ceilings.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah,
that if they're both clicking, if they're fully recovered, if they're able to, that will be like one of the absolute best defensive backcourts in the NBA.
oh yeah,
Um, Offensively, it's a little bit different. Oladipo isn't as good as a shooter as Beal is, but I don't know. I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine what this team looks like. I kind of have to see them, maybe look more into the numbers, because you have this weird situation where you have Christian Wood, who's emerging as like a genuine star.
yeah,
Um, Wood is averaging somewhere around like 23 and 10 this year. Like,
yeah. No, he's been on fire.
he's been ridiculous. And Wall has been good in the minutes he's gotten. Um, there is definitely a um, version of this team that is probably pretty good.
Yeah, like I think if nothing else, they'll be a tough out. Like wherever they wind up going, that they get knocked out.
Mhm.
Like I still think that top six in the West is very tough to crack. But they'll have, I don't know, like everyone's locked in there, and they're not exactly playing a bunch of slouches. Like John Wall's a former All Star. Victor Oladipo's been an All Star. Christian Wood might be an All Star this year.
Um,
They have pieces, and
yeah.
they also have enough picks that they can kind of just say, all right, yeah, we'll go all out. Like we don't need to tank for a bad pick.
Tom, can you take this over for about 2 minutes? I just need to call my boss about something.
Yeah, of course. Um, so obviously the Rockets wind up with Victor Oladipo. They wind up with Dante Exum. They wind up with Kurix. They wind up with a whole bunch of picks. I think for Dave and I, looking at like the trade as a whole, the piece that made both of us kind of raise our eyebrows was Jared Allen going to the Cavs. The big one, well, the big kind of thing that made us wince there was just that Jared Allen's 22 and a starting quality center in the NBA, and like a good starting quality center. And so, I mean, we've talked about it with like the Lakers not wanting to trade Kyle Kuzma. It's just like that's the kind of player that when you're making this gigantic, uh, like 7 draft pick selling way into the future trade, that's the kind of player you're not going to be able to get in to your organization. That's the kind of player that just doesn't exist for you anymore because you don't have that back of the first round pick. You don't have the ability to get him in the building. So I was surprised by that. I think the more that I thought about it and the more that Dave and I talked about it, it became clear that like this is probably just well, we couldn't include Spencer Dinwiddie in the trade, so we have to move somebody because we have to get Harden. Another interesting wrinkle to this that I don't think we've touched on is that there were reports this morning that the Sixers were offering Tyrese Maxey and Ben Simmons and then a bunch of picks for Harden. We had I think Dave before we got on the show, had a question from somebody he talks to about would it have been better for the Nets to just trade Karis LeVert for Victor Oladipo 1-for-1? My immediate answer to that was no, because if you trade Karis LeVert for Victor Oladipo 1-on-1, you are basically creating a free road for the Sixers to just trade for James Harden at probably a fraction of the price that you were going to pay for him, because they know that they're not bidding against anybody. So I think, the other interesting thing would be hearing, and I'm sure we'll hear about this in the coming days. I'm just talking about the Philly potential and what we were hearing about them this morning, and then also the question you had with trading Oladipo for LeVert 1-for-1. But yeah, no, I think we'll hear more in the coming days as to if that Tyrese Maxey and Ben Simmons trade ever was actually on the table. You never know. Maybe that's just what the Rockets were hoping for. But I don't know. If you're Brooklyn, I think if you're Brooklyn and you have Harden saying, I want to come to Brooklyn, you kind of have to do whatever is necessary to get him there, because the second team on his list is Philly. And so, if you're Brooklyn, even if you're kind of slowing down right now, you're still one of the two favorites in the East, and you don't want to just create a third contender out of a guy hoping to be traded to your team. So, did they give up a ton? Yeah, I think they did. Do I think it was a necessary ton? Yeah.
You know what's interesting here is they obviously gave up a ton in terms of the picks and LeVert, Allen, and Taurean Prince. But I feel
Taurean Prince is where we draw the line.
I think there was a while where all of the Harden trade rumors to Brooklyn always had LeVert, Allen, and then one of Joe Harris and Spencer Dinwiddie. Yeah. So that's the part that I find interesting, is that how I understand Dinwiddie is partial ACL tear, probably not playing the rest of this year. But how did Joe Harris not end up in this trade?
It's a good question. Maybe that's why you bring in Victor Oladipo as part of it. Say, look, we're not going to move Joe, but you can get access to an all-star guard who has looked like a top 5 MVP finisher at times in his career. But it's a good question. You have to imagine Houston asked.
Oh, I'm sure.
I think my answer would probably be, you try and rope Oladipo into this as a sweetener to just be like, well, we can't give you Joe Harris, but we can get you Victor Oladipo, and an extra first-round pick that might be better than Brooklyn's, depending on how the Bucks do.
Sorry, I was just my boss called. I had to do something.
Oh, don't worry about it.
Zoned out for a second.
No worries.
But have we talked about have you gone on to the Brooklyn part of this yet?
In terms of what, just getting James Harden?
Or what they look like?
It's funky. Obviously, we don't know what Kyrie Irving's status is going forward. And, we don't say that pejoratively. The things that he seems to be concerned with right now seem to be a bit bigger than basketball. Mm-hmm. But in terms of when we talk about what happens between the lines on a court, we don't know if he will be there.
Yeah.
In the event that he isn't there, you're probably looking at what? James Harden. Who's their two guard going to be now? Because Dinwiddie's gone for a while.
Shamet?
You play Joe at the 2?
Shamet?
Okay, yeah. So
Chris
Harden.
Chioza?
Is Luau Cabarro a Sixer? No. Net?
Yes, he is. He's been decent this year.
Yeah, so one of Shamet or TLC. Joe at the 3, Durant 4, and DeAndre Jordan 5.
Yes, but also okay, we can I think always pick this apart by saying what does their depth look like, but what does it matter if you have Kevin Durant and James Harden and Kyrie Irving? But just to say it, I am curious. I need to look at some sort of updated Nets roster thing. What does their depth look like now?
Yeah, I think my biggest concern would just be as someone who picked a Nets Lakers finals, if you're running in now,
which
obviously
I
you
do
have
think
to
is
get,
looking better.
yeah, like I like the odds of getting there. You still have to get through Milwaukee, which is not a foregone conclusion by any means, because Milwaukee could probably carve you up inside with some of their pieces. Um, and Milwaukee might be one of the only teams that can actually defend this Nets team. I mean, well, I put defend in air quotes because how well do you defend the trio of Durant, Harden, and Kyrie? Dave, I'm not getting audio for you, bud.
How about now?
Yep.
My new microphone has this like tap to mute feature, and sometimes I
Ooh,
forget whether I've tapped it or
I see.
not. I don't want to harp too much on like what the East is looking like now,
Yeah.
but you look at that roster, you look at the depth issues they might have. Obviously, a lineup with Kyrie, James Harden, and Kevin Durant. I mean, how are you going to stop that from the defensive end if all three of them are out there? And if like the big thing, I mean, I've heard this a lot on a bunch of NBA podcasts, whether it be Zach Lowe or like Kevin O'Connor or people like
Yeah.
that who talk about like the biggest thing for Harden here is can Harden return to playing like just normal
Non-hardball.
basketball?
Yeah.
Can he adjust to a system where he is not dribbling the ball for 16 seconds before either taking a step back three or passing it?
It's interesting because, like, I think like we've seen Kyrie look really good on teams where he's just taking entire possessions off, or not taking possessions off, but like definitely just kind of standing off ball for most of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the interesting one also, like, there's I think a version of this team where Harden's handling the ball most of the time, and you're actually good because like you
Yeah,
could run a Harden Kevin Durant pick and roll. That is horrifying.
yeah,
Um,
that is. I mean, that's the thing. Like Kyrie is the third option now.
yeah, which isn't like it's nuts. Like,
Yeah,
and his I feel like the best that we've seen him look was that 2016 finals series where he was a definite second option. So like what's Kyrie as your third option even gonna look like? Um
I mean, I
it's
the offensive potential of a team like that, and the fact that they still got to keep Joe Harris, who is such a lockdown
yeah,
shooter,
yeah,
which means that if you are a team playing the Nets off ball, you have to pay attention to like four different guys who can knock down a three at like a 40% clip. Um,
yeah.
I'm really interested basketball wise, just in terms of how Steve Nash figures out how to use like Harden in this like off ball setting.
Yeah, it's
Um,
gonna be interesting.
because like ever since Kyrie has been out in the few Nets games that I've been watching since that's happened, Durant has been playing like pseudo point forward for a lot of them.
Yeah.
He's racking up a ton of assists. He's running a lot of pick and rolls.
We're getting like
Um,
2019 Warriors or 20 yeah, like spring 2019 Warriors point center Durant.
yeah, he's looking like that. He's kind of looking like that year that Durant won the MVP that Westbrook was injured for a lot of with
Yeah.
the Thunder. Like, and so now you add the Harden element. I mean, I gotta say, just as a fan, I'm so excited to watch the first Harden Durant game,
I'm very
um,
excited.
which I assume will be like this weekend or something.
Yeah, probably.
Who knows when Kyrie will be back? I'm not going to speculate on that.
Yeah.
Um, I will say, I don't want to make this about the Heat. Just a brief comment about the Heat, though. Um,
How you feeling
there's
about
a
the Heat
part of
right
me
now, Dave?
that there's some pressure taken off, where I think like now that I mean I've seen some Heat fans on Twitter right now be very confident still that the Heat can make it through. But for me, what this made me feel like I'm not worried anymore really about like competing for a title this year. because genuinely as a fan, that worry going away makes me
Yeah.
feel a little bit more comfortable about the team.
We've talked about like that championship or bust mentality being kind of destructive, or not destructive, but like not the most fun as a fan.
It's not fun, and this is the first year in 7 years. I mean, I know that's a luxury to say it's the first year in 7 years that I've got to think about that. But it's the first year in 7 years since I got to think about that. And to be
Yeah.
fair, 7 years ago I was much younger and
No way.
paid attention to this a little bit less. Was a
Yeah.
little bit more of a casual fan. Didn't have my full heart into it all the time.
A 2013 Heat fan was casual.
Well, I'm not going to get into that, but
uh, in any event,
in any event, the way this affects the Eastern Conference is kind of like hard to comprehend right now. There's so many factors. My one of my first instincts, and maybe this is silly, maybe I am really underrating the Nets in this matchup, but I kind of think Indiana's a very bad matchup for them.
I think they're a bad matchup. I don't know how much it's going to matter.
That's true. But I mean, we did just see last year, there was a lot of talk before the Bucks Heat series about Miami's just a bad matchup for Milwaukee.
Yeah.
But still, like most people pick the Bucks to win. But
Yeah, that's a
sometimes
fair.
that bad matchup stuff does come to fruition. But does any bad matchup thing matter when you have three guys in the playoffs who can just score at will?
Yep. Like, if like bad matchup Pacers for the Nets probably looks like, well, Domas just bullied Kevin Durant and got a layup, and then Durant came down and pulled up and drilled a three in his eyes. So
Yeah.
like how bad can it really be when you're matching up poorly? When ultimately for the last 6-8 minutes of a game, you can run Durant, Harden, and Kyrie out there.
Yeah. I mean,
There's like a weird nihilistic undertone to this whole show of like, yeah, sure, there are some teams that match up better or worse than others, but how much does it matter when like there's the Durant Nets up there?
yeah. I mean, I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but like the thought of a Nets Lakers finals now just seems ridiculous.
Yep.
It the I mean, frankly, I would probably still slightly lean the Lakers because of their
Yeah.
depth,
Yeah.
and the Lakers have been together for a year.
Yeah.
And they've just added. I mean, they obviously added Schroeder and Harrell, which are big pieces, but the core of that team's been together for a year. I think one thing we should be prepared for is there is a chance that in the first week or two of this Nets thing, they lose a couple games, and we shouldn't think that this was an awful trade because they lose a game because they haven't been able to figure it out yet.
I'm gonna light things on fire when it happens.
They might lose a game to,
The New York Knicks. Say it.
they might lose to the Knicks, but it's okay. Everyone's losing to everyone this season. I mean,
Everyone's losing to the Knicks this season.
everyone is losing to the Knicks.
No, but I think you're right. Like, it's important to give this time because ultimately, like, they didn't make this trade for a January 20th game against, like, I don't know, the Thunder. Like, they made this trade for April, May, June,
Yeah, that's a great point.
where they will undoubtedly be playing. Now, one final note as a Heat fan, there were a few weeks in there where it seemed like the Tyler Herro, Duncan Robinson package could get a trade done. The Heat seem like a distant third at best in the Eastern Conference now. Like, I feel like the walls between that 1, 2, and 3 through 8 in the East have just gotten so much stronger.
They sure have.
As a Heat fan, you are officially looking at it as the Heat did not trade for James Harden. How do you feel outside of the we're not a championship contender this year thing? Are you okay with it?
Well, I should say, I do think there is a world in which I'm not going to say champ make the finals just because of the Nets, but I do think there is a world in which we get a favorable first round matchup. Our
Yeah,
second round matchup is maybe the Bucks again,
and
and
maybe you make an Eastern Conference Finals.
yeah, I think there's still a world where we make the Eastern Conference Finals, bearing we have a nice path to it.
Yep.
However, I will say as now, I don't want to make it just sound like I'm saying this because I always trust what the Heat are doing, whatever. I'm kind of okay with it.
Okay.
I think obviously a team that is like kind of centered around Jimmy Butler, Bam, and James Harden is a very scary team with a lot of versatility both on offense and defense.
Yeah, you can't hunt James Harden on that team because they can just switch it, and now Bam's guarding whoever the guard is.
Yeah. And as much as part of me was kind of hoping today that, I mean, I know we heard a few weeks ago that the Heat were out of the deal. And there was a little small part of me today that I was kind of hoping we were going to see some tweet about like the Heat are kind of in the mix. I am okay with the fact that this didn't go our way because I think I'm not convinced that adding Harden and losing Hero, Robinson, maybe Achua,
Yeah.
maybe someone else actually makes us like it definitely makes
They,
us better.
they,
No, I'm not going to say it doesn't make us better. It makes us better. But I'm not sure if it makes us like guaranteed finals appearance better.
yeah, like
So I think for the
that's a
Nets
fair
it
point.
makes sense. You say I'm going to give you four like they in their minds they're thinking I'm going to give four picks, four swaps. We now have two top 5 players and
Yeah.
one, like top 15 player. Um, if the Heat do a deal like that, they have just traded their youngest best asset and hero.
Yeah.
Um, and what? I mean, as much as I love the Heat and as much as I love Jimmy and Bam, we're not looking at like a bunch of top 5 players here. We're looking at Bam, who's like maybe a borderline top 20,
Yeah.
Jimmy, who's in
Top
that like
25, and then Jimmy's what, like top 15?
yeah, and then
Yeah.
Hart. I do think there is a world in which the Rockets were kind of coming to the Heat. And I mean, this is probably what happened. The Rockets were probably coming to the Heat saying, we want Tyler, Duncan
Yeah.
Robinson, Precious Achua, a ton of picks,
Yeah.
maybe Kendrick Nunn. And I think the Heat were thinking, like, our team is kind of old already. We can't give up all of our young guys here. We need to keep some of them.
That's a really good point. Like, especially because what's James Harden's deal right now? Like 2 more seasons?
Yeah.
Obviously, you hope that he re-signs when you trade for him, but you don't have a guarantee of that. And like, if you trade for Harden, all this stuff, and he walks, it's very scary for the Heat if you've given up Hero, Robinson, and all these picks.
Now watch me completely take all of this back if the Heat somehow get involved in the Bradley Beal talks.
Of course, naturally, yeah. But that, I mean, did we have any other real angles on this? Like, I think we kind of covered it all.
Um, I mean, I don't have. Yeah, I can't really think about anything. I don't know if you're at all want to talk about like the last like week of the season at all, or what are you thinking?
Honestly, I feel like the Harden content's what's driving numbers right now.
That's true. Um, I just want to take a look, see what um, people are saying. See if there's any additional pieces to this right now. I don't want to miss anything.
Yeah, actually, that's a good idea. I'll check in on Woj's feed.
Allegedly,
Oh, this
multiple
is,
teams have inquired about PJ Tucker's availability since the trade happened.
that makes sense.
Um, I think it would be very a real Heat move to just kind of whiff on this Harden Oladipo stuff, but we end up with PJ Tucker.
Yeah. But you have a moment to talk about PJ Tucker.
And I mean, there was a point earlier today I was talking to a friend who's a Sixers friend, our friend James, who's been on the show. When there was talk about a third team, I was I really wanted the Heat to get involved as that third team. Like, let's
Right.
get PJ Tucker. Like, why? Let's get Torian Prince. Someone.
Yeah.
Uh, but it really shows how some of this stuff does come out of nowhere. Obviously, we saw all day like it's either Nets or Sixers, Nets or Sixers, and then leaned Sixers
Yeah.
for like an hour,
Yeah. There was a point there where it looked like he was going to be a Sixer.
and it flipped back, and then all of a sudden Cleveland and Indiana are involved.
Yeah.
How do you feel, Tom, as a Knicks
Okay.
fan? Do you think? I don't
I
know.
know where you're going with this.
Is there any part of you that wanted the Knicks to get involved as a third team here? I mean,
No. No.
no.
I don't, because okay, have you heard of the principle of inertia?
Yes.
The idea that an object at rest will stay at rest, an object in motion will stay in motion. The Knicks are a basketball version of that. Because if the Knicks right now are at rest, they are playing well. They're not going to be one of the best teams in the East this year. That's fine. They're playing well. They're building something. Julius Randle's going to be an all-star. We're putting it out there every episode. We have to. And they're not making any irresponsible trades. But if they start making trades, that brings us closer to like the doomsday scenario of like, well, all of a sudden we signed away Mitchell Robinson so that we could get Andre Drummond. Like the Knicks, I'm glad the Knicks didn't get involved because the Knicks getting active gives the Knicks an opportunity to be like irresponsibly active.
That's true.
I thought you were going to go the route of like, is New York firmly a Nets town now? Which
Well, I mean,
it's
right
still
now
not.
the Knicks have the better record, right?
Yeah, look at the standings. Like I'm sure that a lot of like national basketball media will, if thinking about basketball in New York, will talk about the Nets and like mostly the Nets. But in New York, it's still the Knicks. They're still
Yeah.
the number one team. Like if you're over the age of like 12.
And we are like one like I mean, we are a Nets Clipper like collapse in the playoffs away from the Nets just continuing to be a laughing stock.
Oh yeah, like if
If this doesn't work, if they don't make the finals with this three,
it's gonna be hilarious. Like we haven't even thought about if this doesn't work, but it would
yeah,
be so funny.
that might be a decent way to go out on this too. Where is the scenario where this doesn't work for you?
Um,
What happens? Is it just too many cooks?
See, I think they have such a high floor because of the talent, but I think that there's a scenario where you get into a game with either a Milwaukee, like I think Milwaukee and LA are really, and when I say LA, I mean the Lakers. Those are the only two teams that I could really see this not working against.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you run into Milwaukee, like you can throw Drew Holiday at Harden, which like, yeah, that's probably like Harden's still going to get his, but it might be a little bit less efficient. You can throw Middleton at Kyrie, a little bit of a mismatch, but like you don't feel awful about it. And then you can throw Giannis at Kevin Durant and still have Brook Lopez protecting the rim. Milwaukee could give him a game, could give him a series, like, and obviously offensively, Milwaukee will have a very good time. Um, so I think, yeah, there's a world where like Milwaukee beats them in a playoff series because Drew and Middleton, like Giannis is obviously putting up his numbers, but then Drew and Middleton also are just slicing and dicing Kyrie and Harden for
Mm-hmm.
7 games or however many it goes. That's door A. We do a lot of door talk here.
Yeah.
Door B is you get into a postseason series with the Lakers and they just go big on you and you have no answer.
Yeah.
And
I mean, Not to compare the two teams, but that was my thought process with the Pacers.
They can go big.
Yeah.
It's true. Um,
I mean, losing Jarrett Allen, I think, will hurt this team. Jarrett's been significantly better than DeAndre Jordan.
oh yeah, like even as just like a body you have to throw at people. I'm gonna give you a little quiz here,
Okay,
Dave.
I'm ready.
As of right now, and I say as of right now because the Nets have 3 open spots available on their roster. They have a 5.7 million mid-level exception.
Okay.
They have a minimum, and they have a 5.7 disabled player exception that they got because of Spencer Dinwiddie tearing his ACL.
Right.
But as of right now, DeAndre Jordan goes to the bench. We got 2 minutes left in the first quarter. Who's coming on to play center for the Nets, Dave?
You mean fourth quarter?
No, I mean like if it's end of the first,
Okay.
starters are going to the bench. We're subbing in the bench. Who's coming on to play center for the Nets?
Um. Is it? Ooh, this is a tough one. I feel like I looked at this at some point and I can't remember his name. It's not like Moses Brown, is it? Or is he on the Thunder?
It's Jeff Green.
Oh, wasn't
Like,
thinking about that.
listen, if you're not Sam Presti, you're never thinking about Jeff Green. But yeah, like there's depth concerns in the front court. I mean, you can say, oh yeah, we'll put Durant at the 5. He was guarding Jokic a lot the other night. I think it was two. No, it was last night. Yeah, he was guarding Jokic a lot last night. It actually didn't go horribly. So like that's a move you have, but I don't think that's a move you want to pull out unless you absolutely have to. So we'll
Yeah,
see what they do with those exceptions. But yeah, I think the other option is just a team goes big on them and they have no answer.
yeah. I mean, I guess an important thing to think about too is this team can always change again with the
Yes.
buyout guys.
Yes.
I don't know who's going to be available, but
Yeah.
I mean, if they can get their hands on a,
Is it possible Andre Drummond becomes a buyout guy? Just as like a we have Jared Allen now?
yeah, I think that's possible. Drummond, I was even thinking less. I mean, I don't mean less as in like a pejorative way, but like an Avika Zubac.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like, there's guys around the league who definitely could fill that role for the Nets, I think.
Absolutely.
Um, but yeah, I think depth will definitely be a concern. But a starting lineup of Harden, I mean, I guess it would be Irving, Harris, Harden, Durant, and DeAndre Jordan is, I assume, what they're going to be going with.
Listen, I will close it on this. Hope we get a Nets Hawks playoff series because that would be insane and it would be so much fun and we should all be rooting for it.
I think that'd be fun too. Probably possible too. I mean, I think we both had
Yeah.
the Hawks at the bottom, like the seventh or eighth spot.
They jumped out to a little bit better than that, but I feel like water's finding its level.
Yeah, they're kind of, I think, seeing the limits of a team that has like almost, I think you could probably say 2 or 3 good defenders.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be great. I mean, the teams played, I think, a week or two ago, and it was
The Hawks won, didn't they?
they might have won, yeah, and it was like nearly a 300-point game. Um, and that game also had the post-game conference with Steve Nash, in which he said that Trae Young's little move to get fouls
Oh yeah.
is not basketball. So there's a little beef there. I know Trey says that his favorite player of all time is Steve Nash. So it got to hurt. But yeah, so a lot of narratives there. The offense would be ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to harp on negatives too much. Is there any negatives for the Nets on the defensive side here? Losing Allen, Torian Prince is a decent defender for them.
I don't know if there are any. I don't know if this trade created any worries you didn't already have about this team's defense.
That's a good point.
Like, yeah, I don't know, some bigger teams might give them trouble. That was already going to be the case. We saw it with the Pacers. Um, is your backcourt going to be shutting people down? Probably not. It wasn't going to be before this. So I don't know. I mean, we'll know more about what this Nets team looks like in the coming weeks as they kind of fill out the roster with those exceptions. And as of right now, I feel like this makes them the best team in the East.
Yeah.
But it's weird because, like, we said that before the season, and they're below five. What are they at? 500 now?
Yeah, I think they're 6-6.
Yeah. So like we said that before the season, and they're breaking even at this point.
Yeah.
But they're dangerous, and I feel like in the NBA, it's probably a good idea to bet on talent, and they have the most of it now.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is the thing that I think kind of happens every year.
Yeah.
And where you kind of talk yourselves into maybe some of these other teams. I mean, every, like, it seems like maybe once a decade you're going to get a Heat like team, or like that
Yeah.
2011 Mavericks team,
Yeah.
or that like just sneaks their way to the finals. I mean, in the Mavericks
They're
case, they
flying
win.
away.
Just based on team basketball, not having the most talent, but having the
Yeah.
best team that fits together.
2013 Indiana Pacers.
Yeah, like these teams, we want to talk ourselves into them being good and being able to compete. But we have
There's
seen,
only so like dangerous they can be.
yeah, and we have seen countless times in the playoffs that when we get to the end of a game and it's a close game, the only thing that is going to end up mattering is like shot making. Do you have someone when the game is completely slowed down, when the defense is super locked in on the other side and they're denying everything, and you're not able to get good off ball movement?
Yeah.
Do you have someone that can just create a shot?
Yeah.
And I think that is, I mean, the Nets probably have it better than any team right now. They probably have it better than the Lakers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I do think as a Heat fan, I kind of alluded to this but didn't really get into it. I feel less stressed out
Nice. I'm happy for you.
because it's like, before this happened, I was like, oh, we gotta like prove that wasn't a
We were
fluke.
right.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. But now it's like, eh, you know, if we end up in the playoff series against the Nets and losing 5, I'm not like, I'll be upset, but it's like,
What are you gonna do?
yeah,
Who's gonna beat that team?
Yeah.
All right. Feel like that about sums it up.
Yeah.
Nets are really good, y'all.
Yeah. Crazy day.
We'll see y'all tomorrow for the Kings episode.
Yeah, stay tuned. We're going to be talking Kings. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching.